Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and in today's video, I'm here to help you get your teams locked in for Game Week 19. Right then, so in today's video, I'll be looking through all of the key transfer tips, the best captains, and any other general FPL advice to help you lock in your sides ahead of Game Week 19. But before we do, if you're new around here, I'd really appreciate it if you could just leave a like and subscribe to the channel, only if you enjoyed today's content, of course. In the meantime, let's take a quick look at my team performance from Game Week 18, 66 points with a -4, so it was actually as close to a grey arrow as I think I could have possibly come. I think I went down by about 2,000 places, which really isn't much at this point, but it does mean my green arrow streak is sadly over, just about, but looking to bounce back, of course, in Game Week 19. Captain return from Salah, 9-pointer for him, 10 points from Palmer, very decent, of course, but the EO made sure that it didn't really gain me any rank. The double Arsenal clean sheet did help recover the lost points elsewhere, and of course, Lewis Hall and Isak both doing the business for Newcastle as well. Frustrations around my team though, I took the -4 to bring in Trent and Mbeumo as my Saka replacement and obviously upgraded Rico Lewis to Trent. I still think that will pay dividends over the next few game weeks. I like the Game Week 19 fixture, for example, and the data is looking really good on Trent. But Mbeumo was much more of a solidity play. I couldn't quite afford Bruno, otherwise I probably would have gone there, in all honesty, but I couldn't quite do it, so I went with another 90-minute man with, although difficult-looking fixtures on paper, Brentford's home form was very decent, so I'm hoping those home fixtures coming will hopefully bring points for Mbeumo, but nothing this week, and obviously the hit technically didn't really pay off. Now, elsewhere, João Pedro is looking like more and more of an issue each week. I'll go into him in just a moment's time. Similar with Semenyo, although I think he had 5 or 6 shots on goal in Game Week 18, maybe slightly unfortunate not to get an attack and return there. Across the board, I think it's okay. Obviously, a grey-ish arrow, slight red arrow, not ideal, and not a game week that I'll be remembering for a long time to come. But I think I'm pretty well set up now for the next few game weeks. So let's take a look at some of the key issues facing our sides ahead of next week. So the number one issue facing a lot of our sides, of course, ahead of Game Week 19 is the red cards that were given out in Game Week 18. Bruno Fernandes being the key issue there. And it is very frustrating for all of us who went there in Game Week 18 thinking there was a decent run of fixtures, good data, and ideally looked like one of the best Saka replacements. Now, obviously, there was a bit of a split pin there. Not everyone went there. Some people went with Ødegaard, maybe one of the Liverpool midfielders. Anthony Gordon was probably the only one that's paid dividends so far. But of course, if you went with Bruno Fernandes, you've got a bit of a decision to make right now. He's banned for the Newcastle home game, which, again, on paper, probably didn't look the best right now, considering Newcastle have had 3 clean sheets on the bounce and are in good form. But even now, without that game, he's now going into Liverpool in Game Week 20. And over the next 2 game weeks, considering he's banned in one and then it's a tough defence to break down in the second game, I understand why most people will be likely to want to sell him. Now, one thing I would note very quickly before moving past Bruno Fernandes is that if you can hold him on your bench for a couple of game weeks, or even just the Newcastle game, he does run into Game Week 21 with Southampton to come, and then a good run of fixtures after that. So if you've got one of the deepest squads in the world and you can afford to bench him, then maybe you could look at doing so. But I think in 99.9% of cases, he is probably a sell, because most of us can't be having someone who's above 8 million sat on the bench for a week or two. After that, Justin Kluivert has sadly picked up his 5th booking. Any of you who bought him are now going to be looking elsewhere. There are good options in and around that price point that I'll be discussing in this video, so do stay tuned for that as your replacement strategy. After that, John Duran is maybe not a player that was owned by a lot of people, but there are consequences to him now being banned for the next 3 games, 2 of which are in the Premier League, that being against Brighton at home and then Leicester at home. Now, those 2 are both obviously very good games, and with John Duran out, you would think that Ollie Watkins becomes a lock in that Aston Villa side and maybe gets an opportunity to earn his first team place back after those 2 game weeks. So there might be an opportunity there to jump on a very low-owned Ollie Watkins, but of course it is risky because he had lost his place in the side previously and could lose it again once John Duran is back. Emil Smith-Rowe, seems like a recurring injury doubt at the moment. I don't think too many owners are still out there, but if you are, then I would say now could be a good opportunity to move away from him, again at that price point that I will be discussing later on. And Pedro Porro was benched again. So another issue with Spurs is, of course, the amount of defensive injuries they've got, meaning that at the back, I'm not really expecting too many miracles from them regardless. But Porro seemingly doesn't necessarily seem as much of a lock as he used to be last season. So at his price point, considering clean sheets aren't there either, I think unfortunately for me, even if the fixtures are good, or middling, let's say, at the moment, he is probably also a sell right now. So my Game Week 19 transfer targets are dominated primarily by players from one club, that being Crystal Palace. Now, they've not been in bad form at all recently. They started the campaign pretty slow, but they have been picking up recently, and they've got a really decent fixture run, starting now, lasting for quite a long time, and begins this week with Southampton at home. Daniel Munoz is top of the billing for me, and if I had more defensive problems, I'd be looking at him as my transfer in. His underlying attacking data is brilliant for a player of his price, and especially that XG per 90 at 0.18 is almost unheard of for a defensive player. So again, if you want the attacking upside from a defender at under 5 million, don't look any further than Daniel Munoz at the moment. He does pick up a lot of yellow cards though, so one to monitor that he will get the odd one pointer here or there. Ismail Assar is also very high up in the ranking. Good attacking data, I think running at over 0.5 XGI per 90, which again for a sub 6 million midfielder is very decent indeed. Again, same fixtures as Munoz, great hopping on point. You could equally look at someone like an Eberechi Eze, or maybe even Jean-Philippe Mateta up top, but these are my preferred two as it stands, given that Eze's had his slight injury doubts and Mateta isn't on the best run of form right now either. After that, Anthony Gordon is maybe a player I overlooked a little bit too much when considering a Saka replacement last week. I do regret that a little bit, but I don't want to be too hindsighty considering he just scored a goal. I think it's also because Newcastle going forward are looking really decent right now, and they don't look like a side that are going to stop scoring anytime soon. But the reason I went with Mbeumo is because he is more locked into 90 minutes. He has got penalties, and at home, Brentford are very decent as well. So I do regret that maybe a little bit, and he would be one of my transfer targets if you were looking at picking up a midfielder of that sort of ilk this week, maybe as a Bruno replacement, for instance. After that, Jordan Pickford, it's not often I talk about transfer targets being goalkeepers, but he's been in phenomenal form recently, and the fixtures over the next few weeks aren't too bad. It's also maybe a slight tactical play that Everton will have a double game week in the next 5 or 6 game weeks, unconfirmed at the moment, but it looks likely to get put in either in game week 24 or game week 25. If that is the case, getting that move done sooner rather than later could be a way to, 1, get some extra clean sheet points over the next few game weeks, and then 2, also guarantee yourself that extra double game week player when it rolls around at an unconfirmed date. After that, Jacob Murphy is another budget midfielder I do like the look of and is being bought by quite a lot of managers at just 5 million. Absolutely brilliant value for money. His attacking acumen in the last few game weeks alone has definitely put him on the radar. The only question mark is, of course, his minutes, and he always gets taken off early. I think he's completed 90 minutes twice this season. Both of those were earlier on in the campaign when Newcastle had other injuries. And although he's been brilliant, I wouldn't expect much beyond 70 minutes in any given game week. However, the attacking data is so good and his price is also so good that if you were looking for an 8th attacker, I really couldn't do much to put you off of him at this point in time. So another quick look at the match projections ahead of Game Week 19. Thanks again to Rob T FPL for allowing me to use this in my video. Now, the clean sheet odds are fairly low across the board this week. No team is above 40%, which means that maybe defensive transfers aren't the best this week because you're not really expecting much upside from whoever you bring in. I'd maybe add the exception of Daniel Munoz at Crystal Palace. They've got a decent chance of a clean sheet at 38%, and obviously that is the highest on the board here this week at home to Southampton, and combined with decent goal threat, so 1.95 expected goals isn't half bad either. And when Daniel Munoz is getting the sort of chances on goal that maybe you'd expect from a midfielder at times, he might be the one defender that I'd consider having enough upside this week in particular to be buying in. Outside of that, no one's really expected a clean sheet massively. Man City at 36% is the same as Chelsea and Arsenal. Liverpool at 34%, just trailing behind there. So if you've got defenders from any of those clubs, I probably wouldn't be moving them on this week. In terms of goal threat, there's a few on the board above 2, which is my bar for expecting a bit of a haul. So Man City come out on top this week, 2.65 away at Leicester. I don't know too many managers who still have Erling Haaland, but if you do, that's got to be in the captaincy consideration. And I definitely would not be selling him ahead of Leicester, no matter how bad Man City have been recently, and no matter how bad Haaland's been recently. This is a prime opportunity to get some returns finally on the board for Erling Haaland. If he doesn't haul against Leicester, all hope is really lost. So I would probably look at selling him after this week if you do still have him. More on him in a little bit, by the way, as well. Elsewhere, we've got a few other clubs expected over 2 goals, Spurs being one of which. So if you've got the likes of Solanke, that might still be a tempting hold, or even a possible buy if Cunha does get the ban beforehand. Looking unlikely at the moment, though. Liverpool 2.55, Chelsea 2.45, and Arsenal 2.25, all pretty high. And of course, we've got captaincy candidates in both Liverpool and Chelsea, as well as Man City, of course. So let's take a look at the captaincy matrix now. So we've got a really interesting call on who our Game Week 19 captain might be ahead of the deadline. And there are 4 key candidates once again. Saka's been taken off the billing for the foreseeable future, unfortunately, which simplifies the process a little bit with this decision. However, what I would say to start with is that any one of these 4 could easily be the standout captain. I don't think it's cut and dry as to which one is definitely the standout pick. And although I do believe one player is going to take most people's attention, I think there is opportunity this week if you're willing to go different. I'll start with Isak at the bottom of the list. 6.3 expected points from Fantasy Football Hub is the lowest, but his data and form recently has been something that you just can't ignore. And Man United, despite the new manager, despite the new more slightly control-dominated system, are still conceding chances and conceding goals. And Newcastle, in the form they've been in, 11 goals in the last 3 game weeks, Isak being at the spearhead of that, and data that is getting very, very close to the rest of his competitors on this graph, by the way, on this spreadsheet. I would say that he shouldn't be overlooked, and I definitely would be buying him still if you didn't have him so far. His data, XGI per 90 wise, is actually now matching Erling Haaland. So on to Erling Haaland in particular, because I think if you do still have him, he's got to be in the captaincy candidate conversation. 0.82 XGI per 90 is a severe drop-off of what we were expecting earlier on in the season. He was running comfortably over 1 XGI per 90. That has dropped off drastically in the last few game weeks, but it's still good on the whole. And the fixture, I would say, out of all 4 of these is the best out of Ipswich away, West Ham away, Man United away. I think Leicester is easier than any of those. So it is a fixture play if you were to go there. But like I said, the data's dropped off and you are taking a bit of a punt that Man City are able to sort themselves out enough that they can batter Leicester, because you really do need them to batter them in order to get anything really out of Erling Haaland as a captain at the moment, because I do expect all 4 of these players to get at least 1 attacking return. So if you were to go against the likes of Salah, Palmer or Isak, you really need 2 or 3 from Haaland to make it worth your while, or to maybe chance your arm on taking the risk there, considering the effective ownership. That being said, Ruud van Nistelrooy's Leicester do concede a very large amount of chances through the centre. Their 2.4 XGI per 90 conceded, or XGC per 90 conceded, is amongst the worst in the league and has regressed under their new coach. So it is an opportunity. The 2 main ones, of course, are going to be Palmer and Salah. Now, Salah, I would say, has a very slightly harder fixture than Palmer does, but West Ham away are not a defence that I'd be worried about at all. They are still amongst some of the worst clubs in the league in terms of their underlying defensive data. And I think, considering the form Salah is in, he hasn't blanked now, I believe, in 10 game weeks in a row that he's actually been playable in. Obviously, had the postponement against Everton. And The XGI per 90 is now over 1 attacking return expected per game, which is, again, absolutely elite. In the last few seasons, only really Salah and Haaland have gotten anywhere near to that kind of data, and Salah with 27 attacking returns in just half a season. Absolutely ridiculous, and honestly, I can't really look past him myself for the captaincy armband this week. If you did want to go differential though, and I know his ownership is extraordinarily high as well, but I don't think too many people are going to be captaining Cole Palmer. Now, he is expected the highest expected points via Fantasy Football Hub at 7.8, although it is very marginal over Salah. Real 50-50 call there. But again, his attacking data is very good. 0.84 is still extremely good, better than Haaland, better than Isak, slightly worse than Salah, but most people's are at the moment. But Palmer is a flat track bully. He's got a brilliant record against the promoted and the weaker defences. So I wouldn't be overlooking him overall. It's just more of a fact that Salah is so consistent that you're not only banking on Palmer hauling, you're banking on Salah not hauling for this to work out. And I really can't see a universe where Salah doesn't get an attacking return or two, at least against West Ham. But who knows, you could roll the dice. If you are chasing rank a little bit, you could take a chance that Salah does have an off day against West Ham, and Palmer away at Ipswich or Haaland away at Leicester are both opportunities to maybe fight against the inevitable Salah at the moment. For me though, it is Salah that is the top, and then Palmer slightly below that. If you've still got Haaland, he's very much in the conversation, but it will be captaining Salah for me. Now, as discussed in my transfer options video from earlier this week, I am looking at potentially making a midfield upgrade. Semenyo has been extremely frustrating since I got him in all the way back in game week 6 on my wildcard, and his attacking data, although very good, hasn't been reflected in actual FPL points. And there comes a time when you think, you know what, I've got to cut my losses. However, he's still got another couple of decent-ish games to come, so it might not be an urgent one right now. I'm currently starting Amad Diallo at home to Newcastle, as you'll see in just a moment's time, and Semenyo is sat on my bench away at Fulham, who do have good defensive data, especially at home. But if I was to make an upgrade, I can go to one of a few different midfield options that are all definitely playable in game week 19. The first of which would be Ismail Assar at home to Southampton, good underlying attacking data at 0.49, just a shade under 0.5, which is very decent and very slightly better than Semenyo so far this season as well, by the way. But again, transfers are precious at the moment, so I do want a slightly high bar for what I consider to be an upgrade. The second player that I could be bringing in instead of Semenyo would be Morgan Rogers, who I sold only a couple of weeks ago. I do maybe regret that a little bit. I'm not massively bothered by the fact that he hauled against Man City, considering I was going to bench him anyway, but maybe I underestimated how reliable he would be 4 minutes, generally speaking, although he did get taken off last game week at around 68 minutes. But he has been a very consistent performer for Aston Villa, and their fixtures over the next few are decent. So Brighton at home, Leicester at home after that, and then it's a good run all the way through to, I think, around February, even possibly March time. So he is a player that I am eyeing up to maybe bring back in, although again, I don't think a player like him is ever going to be a rip up your sides to transfer him in right now kind of player. It's more maybe maneuvering the deck chairs kind of thing, and I don't know if it's a high enough priority for me to move on to Semenyo just yet for someone like Morgan Rogers, who, although has a decent game, I'm not sure that it's such a blockbuster standout game that I need to be doing it right now. The other alternative I could be looking at is Murphy, who I mentioned in my transfer targets, and I do like him. His data's good, and Newcastle have been brilliant recently, but I think for me, and one thing that I'm trying to remind myself of is that any player I bring in right now, I need to be very secure on, and I need to know that they're getting very decent minutes, that the underlying attacking data is going to continue and be consistent, and if they've got the bonus of something like set pieces or penalties, that is of course going to be another feather in their cap. Jacob Murphy doesn't really have any of that, and although I do like him when he's on the pitch, and of course he's linking up brilliantly with Alexander Isak right now, personally, I don't know if I'm going to regret making that move in a couple of game weeks' time. If he does consistently get only 60 to 70 minutes, you are limiting the amount of upside that a transfer like that can get you, especially when most of these other players that I'm looking at, including Semenyo to hold, are getting much better minutes than him. That being said, though, I'm not ruling out any of these moves. I think if I was to make one, it would most likely be Ismail Assar in at home to Southampton. The fixture run is great. He's got good minutes and good data. So I could look at making that move and bringing him into my starting lineup straight away. So on to my full team selection for Game Week 19, and I've got one free transfer, 0.4 in the bank, a very small red arrow going into this game week, but nothing to be too concerned about right now. Now, double Arsenal defence away at Brentford doesn't fill me with confidence, both Raya and Gabriel there. And especially because I am currently planning on starting Bryan Mbeumo, it does limit the amount of upside that I've got available to me in my starting 11. Now, I am concerned about that, but not so much that I'd want to bench Bryan Mbeumo, because I do think there's a decent chance of an attacking return. And although I don't think Raya or Gabriel are necessarily going to be great for points this week, I do want that high bar on transfers, and I don't think it's worth selling Gabriel, who's got great goal threat from set pieces and good underlying defensive data, or Raya, who again is playing in one of the best defenses in the league right now. So although not high upside for this week, I don't prefer starting someone like Lewis Hall away at Man United over Gabriel. So I'm more hoping that even if Bryan Mbeumo does hopefully score, maybe Gabriel can get something from a set piece there. But again, low upside. It's not ideal, but you can't have the ideal setup and balance every single week. Outside of that, I'm happy enough with my defence. Trent against West Ham seems like an opportunity. West Ham have conceded, I think, one of the league's highest amounts of chances down that right-hand side. Well, their own left-hand side as it was. And Robinson at home to Bournemouth. It's a home fixture, so I don't mind it. I don't think that there's a high chance of a clean sheet necessarily, but Fulham have pulled out the odd surprise, especially at Craven Cottage. So again, I think he's definitely playable this week over the likes of Lewis Hall away at Man United. Into the midfield, Salah does have the armband away at West Ham. I'm expecting big things from both him and Palmer away at Ipswich. And Mbeumo, I've already explained, has great attacking data, especially at home, and Brentford are very often hauling at home, even against the bigger sides. Now, they've only blanked once so far at home against Nottingham Forest. That was in their most recent home match, but I do back them to score goals, even against one of the toughest defences in Arsenal. Amad Diallo is currently starting for me at home to Newcastle. Now, Newcastle have kept 3 clean sheets on the bounce, so this is risky, perhaps, to be benching Lewis Hall and starting Amad, but I didn't really fancy Newcastle for a clean sheet in this one, even if Man United are missing Bruno Fernandes. I'm hoping that Amad steps up a little bit in his absence and takes on more of a talismanic role, but again, it's definitely not an ideal fixture for this game week, and I could look at maybe either starting Semenyo away at Fulham, although that does give me another conflicting interest of Robinson at home to Bournemouth and Semenyo away at Fulham, and again, that's just maybe one too many conflicts. And if I was to maybe make a swap there, it would be to bring in Ismail Assar ahead of Semenyo as a transfer and start Sarr at home to Southampton, putting Amad on the bench for this game week. Up front, it is the triple of Jackson, Isak and Pedro, all very popular at the moment. Jackson and Pedro, both very frustrating, have gone on a bit of a dry spell each, and Pedro in particular has been very disappointing since I bought him in. That being said, I don't love any of the alternatives around his price point right now, and considering he's one of the only ones getting 90 minutes a match on penalties, I just don't think I can sell him yet, considering the alternatives. If I had a bit more money to get up to someone like a Chris Wood, I might consider doing so, but I can't do that without a hit this week. So again, it's one that I'm probably just going to leave for another week and hope that he finally starts turning his form around soon. Although it's not looking good right now, it must be said, and he might become a sell in the next few weeks. Jackson as well, frustrating, but I'm hoping he starts against Ipswich. Now, a lot of Chelsea fans were saying that the second he got subbed off in game week 18, they lost their shape and Kunku did not do himself any favours up top in the remaining 20 minutes when he came off the bench. And Jackson hopefully, therefore, holds on to his starting spot away at Ipswich. If that is the case, that's a great opportunity for points. And again, I'm not going to maybe force any moves to be selling a player who has a promoted side next up. So I think Jackson for me is another player that ideally, if I had a wild card, I might be looking at doing something with, but there's not too many players out there right now that I prefer over him to the extent that it's worth a transfer right now. So I'm going to roll with it and have Jackson and Pedro both starting for me this week. If I was to make a transfer, it would be to bring in Sarr ahead of Semenyo and start him ahead of Ahmad. But as it stands, I think I'm probably going to roll and have that high bar for transfers, considering I want to save as many as possible ahead of double game week season and chip season. As we reach the end of today's video, let me know in the comments below what your questions are ahead of the deadline. And of course, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, I would really appreciate it. It really does help me out a great deal. In the meantime, good luck in Game Week 19, and I'll see you on the other side of it as we start preparing our teams for Game Week 20.